what do you use to build your REST API? So we have a decent number of people, and again, I'm going to copy in my little stuff here for overall respondents. So 22% of people don't use REST at all. 5.5% of people don't use ColdFusion for their REST, and 2.5% don't use, they use other tools. But the ones that are using it, 23.7%.
Maybe we should tell people what REST is, because those people who don't use it maybe have no idea why they should use it or what it even is.
Yeah.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Gavin Pickin from Audis Solutions, and we're going to be doing our second part on the state of the ColdFusion survey results. And we've got some very interesting data that we found. Gavin put together some really cool graphs that show it. So if you're watching on video, you'll be able to see those. If you're not on video, you can go to the show notes page on terratech.com to have a look at the graphs when we get to those. If you don't know Gavin, he's originally from down under in New Zealand, and he's been doing ColdFusion forever. I want to say 1999 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he used to be working at the University of Auckland, but now he moved to California and he's working for Audis Solutions, where he does amazing things. And in particular, you don't say this in your bio, but aren't you the force behind Content Box? Isn't that your...
I did spend a lot of time doing a lot of work with Content Box, but it got to a point where it was pretty stable, and we've been using it. And so we focused more on, I've been doing a lot more Vue.js stuff and APIs and testing. And so, I mean, we're just trying to push back on Content Box right now. I don't do as much with it. I need to get back to it, but there's plenty of other things, including the podcast, which keeps me pretty busy too. So
yes,
yeah.
Modernize or Die podcast, you and Brad and whoever else you get on the show. So
keeps us
very
busy.
Cool. Podcasts do keep people busy. Anyway, grateful that you do that podcast. And thanks for coming on the CF Live podcast here. So I guess we should just, for the people listening who have no idea what the state of the CFUnited survey is, what is the survey, Gavin?
Well, I mean, I think it's a great survey that you've put on for a lot of years now, but it basically just asks the developers in the ColdFusion community, a series of questions which is useful for the engines, the people who can maintain frameworks or tools in there, to basically figure out who's doing what, who's using what. Some of the questions dive into the community and which community websites you're involved in and everything, but it asks you what type of tools do you use, what JavaScript frameworks do you use, do you program any other languages, like is it a main job or a side job, but just lots of different questions. And a lot of them are like pick one or as many as relevant, but the questions gives everybody some feedback on what's popular, and gives a bit of sort of overview of what's happening in the ColdFusion community. And as again, we work with Audis Solutions and we build lots of tools, and we love this information because we're like, what are things people are using? What are people using a lot of? What are things that they're struggling with? And so for us, it's really good to give information and feedback to figure out, okay, well, maybe there's this problem that we're not solving, no one's solving, or maybe there's something we need to educate people more about. And so it's a really good thing. One of the things we use is, should we be supporting ColdFusion 11 anymore? Who's still using it? And
should you? What's the answer?
No.
No.
In the first episode, we talked about a lot more about the engines. And a lot of those are like 12, 14 years out of support. So don't be using them. Anyways, the new ones are better. Whether you're using Adobe or Lucy, there's so many new features in the newer ones. Don't use old stuff. Gives you a lot more headaches, risk, vulnerabilities, all that. So
yes, definitely better to upgrade your frameworks, your tools, your engine, your OS, all of the bits. So
the other reason that
people come to the survey. Also, by the way, both Lucy and Adobe look at the survey results to get ideas on what they should be doing and what adoption rates are looking like. But it's also good for people in your organization. If you're trying to lobby your boss that you should upgrade, maybe this gives you ammunition, or if you're not using state-of-the-art tools, it shows you how many people are using them, and you can see where you're maybe falling behind on your ColdFusion ecosystem. So, which I think is just as important as the ColdFusion language.
Yep.
For
I know in the next episode, we'll be talking about other sections, but I'm really excited for when we do the trend one. I know you're working on getting some data trends so we can see over time how things have changed, and are more people using Docker than last year, or are more people using this version of ColdFusion, or are people moving from ColdFusion to Lucy or back, or there's lots of great data we'll be able to see with the trends. And so after we go through all this data in a future episode, it'll be really great to come and look at that.
I could answer both those questions and say yes and yes. Yes, more people are using Docker. Yes, more people are using Lucy, though. I think overall Adobe has more users. Oh. But anyway, let's get cracking. So we left off, I think, at question 14, but now we're going to be looking at miscellaneous frameworks and tools. So do you want to share your screen for those on video, and we'll talk through for those on audio what on earth we're seeing?
Yep, for sure.
And so we've got tools here: CommandBox, CFlint, ForgeBox, Logbox, all kinds of really cool tools. And you can see a great, hopefully those on video can see a nice spreadsheet. So tell us about the top frameworks, miscellaneous frameworks and tools.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice. We've ordered them so we can see it a little more clearly, but at the far right, so apparently 131 people said they're not using any miscellaneous frameworks or tools, and 3 are using other. But
I'm shocked, Gavin. I'm shocked how all those people listening are not using any of these tools. I can understand a particular tool you might not have a use case for, but I can't believe any modern ColdFusion developer wouldn't use some of these tools, because most of them, at least half of these tools, are open source and free. And then the other ones aren't exactly I mean, Hack My CF is $10 a month. It's not per site. It's not exactly gonna, I mean, how many Starbucks coffees can you get for that?
Maybe one these days. But yeah, so there's some great tools here, and the top of the list in this is CommandBox, and that makes a lot of sense to me because it's about 26% of people using CommandBox, but a lot of these other tools in here, they are sort of, CommandBox makes it easy to use them. And so second on the list with about 12% of people are using CFlint. And so you can run CFlint without CommandBox, but using CommandBox, it's easier, and same thing with CF format. You can run CF format from, basically using, a CFC or, Java or something else, but using CommandBox, there's a module that wraps that up to make it easier. And so, CF format is 6th on the list or whatnot, down at like 5%. So from top to bottom, we have CommandBox with 26%. We have CFlint at 12%, ForgeBox at 10%. We got Logbox at 9%, HackMyCF at 7.8%, CF format.
Let's add a sentence for the people who have no idea what these tools are. Maybe we could add just one sentence to say what the tool is, because as you're saying, so what is CommandBox? I know it's hard to say in one sentence, but I'm sure you can manage it.
Well, CommandBox is an executable that you can run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And basically, it's a little CommandBox CLI. So it's a command line interface, which allows you to do lots of things. So you can write your own commands in CFML and then run them. And that's what a lot of these other modules are. They're commands that you can run in CommandBox. You can start up a server, so Lucy or Adobe, or even a static site. You can start up a server and it will basically spin up a server where you don't have to worry about installing Adobe or Lucy. You just say, I want Lucy version 5.3.10, and it will install it. If you want, Adobe ColdFusion 2016, it'll download it, start running, and within basically about a minute by the time it downloads it, and you have a server up and running. You can run like tasks with it. You can have basically you can serve your website, or you can just use in development. And there's a bunch of things around CommandBox that make managing servers easier, better. And so most people use it for local development. Some people use it for production development too. And so really it gives you a lot of options for a lot of cool things. But it's a CLI that lets you scaffold out sites. You can install things through ForgeBox. So package management, it's basically like an NPM runner. So it does a lot of things. So you should be using
if you're doing ColdFusion, you need Command Box. It's free. It makes life so much easier.
Yeah.
That's my one sentence version.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it does 10 things and you need to be at least using one of
The
them.
Swiss Army knife. The Swiss Army knife of ColdFusion tools.
Yep. So CF
What about, yeah.
Yep. So CFLint is basically a way for you to verify that your code is of a certain style and format. And so a lot of people use like Prettier to format their code, but it'll actually give you sort of some return information. So when you run a linter on your code, it'll tell you you shouldn't be running this, or you didn't var scope this variable, or other things. And so you can set up a series of rules and then basically run the linter on it, and it can tell you stuff in your code that may be something you should avoid, or something that you can't deploy with. So you can put in rules about like clean code stuff, like my function should be no longer than 100 lines, or your variable should be no longer than a certain thing. They can also say you shouldn't have CF dumps in your production code when you push it, so it can find stuff like that, or don't use create object with Java.
So there's a pre-built list of naughty things you shouldn't be doing, and then you can tweak it yourself to improve.
Yep, and it's built to basically run on your code base to look for issues. And a lot of times, you will tweak it to match your coding standards for your business. But it's a great tool. And again, the easy way for it to run it, I think, is in Command Box. There's a Command Box tool, and you just have a configuration file that says this is my rules, and you just run it, and then it'll give you a little report. You can even spit out report files in HTML, so you can put them in your repo, so you can look at them and see what you got to fix. And I like using the CI because we can spit them out, and then we have a record of when we built to production, these are the 23 things that were wrong. And then next time we're like, oh, we've only got 20 things that are wrong now. We've improved. So that's
very cool.
It's a pretty cool tool.
What's ForgeBox in one sentence?
It's the NPM for CFML.
And what's an NPM?
So if those are using JavaScript, you probably use NPM to install, Bootstrap or underscore or some module or library. And so ForgeBox, it's a repo, which basically anyone could put up a module or a third-party library, and it gives you an easy way to install it into your site, and it'll actually manage the version and keep track of it. So if there's a new version, it can let you know, hey, there's a new version you may want to upgrade, or you can upgrade if you want to, or you can uninstall it. It manages all the dependency for you to better, look after your stuff better. And it's free, and it's not just for box products. You can put anything up there. Framework 1, CF Wheels, all those frameworks have ways to basically use ForgeBox for their people, so you don't have to use ColdBox for it. You can just use anything. So it's
a public package manager. So
yep.
I was talking to the CF Wheels guy, Peter, and I think they have dozens of modules on there that you can add into your CF Wheels. And I know ColdBox, you must have 100 add-ons for ColdBox on there.
Yeah, but even if you want to start up a new ColdBox app, you can say ColdBox create app, and then you can say I want an API, or I want a script, or I want a tag version, and ForgeBox actually stores those templates. And so you give it some variables, and it'll like replace certain names in the files and everything, and spit out basically a new site ready to go. And then you just add your code and away you go. So this scaffolding included too. People use it for templates, for they use it for themes for content box and stuff like that as well. Preside has a bunch of stuff there for their their system. So it's just a way to store and reuse code and manage your packages and your apps. And so just like NPM has a package.json, we have a box.json, and if you're using ForgeBox and Command Box. And the best way to use ForgeBox is using Command Box. You can do it from the browser through the UI and the website, but it's nowhere near as easy or as efficient as using Command Box. So
excellent. So number 4 on the popularity list is Logbox.
Yep, and that's 9.2% of people using Logbox. But so Logbox is pretty neat. It's basically a module that helps you with your logging. And what it allows you to do is to set up your logging, so you can log from anywhere in your ColdFusion site. It doesn't have to be ColdBox. It can be any site can use Logbox. But when you're logging, you can use different providers. So if you're using a database to log your errors today, and then tomorrow you want to switch it up and send them to Sentry, for example, with Logbox, you just change a couple of settings, and now all your logs will go to this new location. You don't have to go change your code everywhere that you did logging. So you don't have to worry about going and changing, 300 occurrences of all your logs. You just tell Logbox, hey, I want to send to Sentry right now. And the cool thing with Logbox is you can say, if I'm in development, put it in a database. If I'm in production, send it to Sentry. If I'm in staging, send it to Rollbar. And you just give it the keys it needs to be able to do the API calls. And the Logbox has providers, which you can download from ForgeBox, and then you can plug and play. And so it's a pretty cool module. It's one of the original modules that came with ColdBox, but it's standalone. So you can install it in any ColdFusion app. You just install the library. Using ForgeBox and CommandBox is easier, but you can just download it too. Put it in your folder and just put some configuration files in your application CFC, and then you can use it. And it just abstracts away how you're logging from what you're logging. So that's the best way to think about that.
What's next on the hit parade of tools?
So HackMyCF. So this is a service that Pete Freitag and Foundio have been doing for, I don't know how long, 10, 12 years it seems like. But basically, they run a little scanner. You sign up, pay some money for the service, and they will scan your site. I think it's usually on a monthly basis, but maybe it's more often. I don't remember exactly.
No. Oh, no, you can pick the frequency. I mean, when we use it, we usually make it weekly, but
okay.
And you get you get an email report and a PDF report, and it shows all the patches that haven't been applied and other security issues that your server has. And it works both for Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy and all the different versions of Java you might have underneath. And what's great is the report has links to articles Pete's written explaining why that particular issue is a security issue and how severe it is. So
yeah,
very
so you
handy.
never have to worry about remembering when to upgrade something. You get an email from Pete and Foundio saying, yeah, we scanned your site and this is what we found, and these things need to be fixed now, and these things should be fixed soon, and this is how you do it. It's a great service, and a lot of people use that to make sure they don't miss out on any 0-day vulnerabilities, or they're using an old version of Java that had some issue. Like, it just saves you so many issues. So it's a great service.
Well, that's a bonus feature that Pete will send out if there is a zero. We've only had like 1 or 2 0-day ColdFusion issues in the last few years, whereas other languages get them regularly. But when there is one, he'll send out, and often his is the first email that lets maybe later Adobe or Lucy will get out an email, but usually he's first out the gate on those kind of things.
Yep. Yeah, so next up we have CF Format. And so that's a little tool that basically does what it says. It helps you format your CF code. And so this, again, is a CommandBox module that makes it easy to run from the command line. With CommandBox, you can say run CF format, and you can tell it, format these folders or these files, this globbing pattern, and it'll go through, and you have an option of running the check, which is like a dry run, and it'll find all the files that has issues and tells you what it's found and what it should be. And then again, you can run it and actually change all those files. So it can change every single file in your site. And I recommend that you do that in a separate Git commit, so you don't mix that stuff up, because the first time you run it, it will change a lot of things. But again, you have the format options that you can configure, and Otis has a coding convention GitHub repo that has our CF format recommendation from like our format. But that's the cool thing, is you can figure out with your team, okay, what style do we want? Everybody decide, okay, this is what we decide now. Every code review, we don't have to argue about, should there be a space before the parenthesis? Should there be should I tab my variables so they're all lined up or not? You can choose the setting in the CF format configuration, write your code however you want, save it, format it, and then you don't have to worry about, did I format this right? So I love it. It's just prettier for, JavaScript and everything, or CSS. It's just nice to format it all, so you don't have to think about it too much, and it's consistent, and everybody's happy. Well, except for the one who doesn't like it. But the good thing is you don't have to worry about what it is. It's just, that's the way it is. So, and again, you get to configure it for your team. So if you don't like it, just fight harder with your team, I guess.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at teratech.com. That is teratech.com. And now back to today's show.
What's next on the top 40 tools?
So FuseGuard. So this is another one of Pete's tools, right? So
Yes.
FuseGuard. And is this the web application firewall? Is that the right one?
That's what it is. It's the web application firewall. Protects your app from intruders by looking for, it cleverly looks for different patterns like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. It's got like a whole database of possible attack vectors, and it's kept up to date with any new attack vectors.
Yes.
And then it stops them before they even get to your ColdFusion code. So if you've got legacy code that's riddled with security issues, you can install this. And although you still should fix your security issues, at least you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah. So that's almost 5% of people using that. And again, I haven't used that too much. Our clients use it. I don't configure it, so I don't, mess with it too much. But it's cool. Sounds awesome. Yeah. And I know
it is. It gives some nice reports that shows who's hacking you and what hacks are they trying and what country do they come from. Surprise, surprise, many come from, Russia or China or Ukraine. Those are the top 3 hacking countries I've seen. So
but again, another tool, and that one is a paid tool too. So as you said, a lot of them here are free, but there's some that are paid, and they're definitely worth it. And the funny thing is, all the ones on here that are paid that are worth it, they're all Pete's from Foundeo. And no, he's not sponsoring this podcast.
No, he isn't. But I have interviewed him. We have an episode where we talk about these cool things. What's the next tool? It's another Pete tool, right?
Yep. So CFUnited, it's 3.4%. So this is a tool that basically scans your code, looking for things that possibly might be something you should fix. Basically, it gives you the option of like CF format where it can identify things that should be fixed and give you the recommendation on what you should do. Or you can just tell it, hey, CFUnited, fix it. And it runs in the CLI. A lot of people use it in the build process, but you can run it from command box as well. But you can run it through a lot of different ways. I think there's a Docker way to run it as well if you don't want to use command box. But it basically allows you to scan your code for things that should be fixed, and then can even fix them for you right away. So you can tell it, these levels of things fixed, these ones don't. You've got these rules, and it gives you lots of reporting options and flexibility. But it's a great tool again, and you can get a license, I think, per site or site licenses for across all your sites. And again, it's another great tool. And again, if security is important to you, which it should be, this is something you should definitely look at.
Yeah, and he has like a bundle deal where you can get CFUnited, FuseGuard, and HackMyCF all together. So instead of buying them separately, you save a bit.
Yep.
What's the next tool on the list? We're getting down to things people don't use too much. Why not?
DocBox, still 3% of people using it. And this is a little tool that I think we took over from, it wasn't Mark Mandel. It might have been Mark Mandel, CFDoc. But DocBox is a tool, and Audis has taken over and sort of spiced it up a little bit. But essentially, it allows you to do Java doc-like metadata around your handlers and your functions. And then when you run the command, it can generate documentation, like API documentation of your code. So if you're a developer and you're not sure what it's doing, or maybe you want to look at the documentation for a tool, a lot of the tools that you've used externally have these type of docs where it says these are the functions and these are the inputs and this is what it takes and this is what it returns. This allows you to do that and generate those HTML files, so you can basically put them up on S3 or GitHub pages, and then you can browse your code API documentation. It's not APIs for REST APIs. It's an API of your code. So it's application programming interface for your code. So basically it's documentation of how your code works. And it's called DocBox because it sort of plays on the whole Java doc blocks. And so that's how you do it. So basically some metadata.
But again, it's for any ColdFusion program. You don't have to be using ColdBox to use
correct
this.
Yep, you can just spin it up, and again, a nice way to run it is using command box. You install it, but then once it's installed globally in your machine, you can just do DocBox and then tell it, hey, this is the folder I want to report on. There's some settings for what I want to do. Spit out the files over here. It'll churn through all the files. It'll figure out what's what. and sometimes you have to give it some mappings because maybe in your code you're extending one file extends another file, but you're using a ColdFusion mapping. So you have to tell DocBox, hey, when I mention framework one lives over here, so make sure you go over there to find that CFC so we can figure out the different pieces that it's extending. But it looks at your code, evaluates extensions and everything, and it spits out some great stuff. And if you go to api.coldbox.org, that's an example, and there's some other API documentation out there. And again, it's not REST API documentation. That's another tool which I think someone listed on the other thing, which is like Swagger Docs. But we have 131 people not using any of these, so that's 16%.
I'm shocked. If you're one of the people listening not using any, please, one of these that appeals to you, check it out today, because it's going to make your ColdFusion programming life so much easier.
And I mean, I highly recommend using CommandBox and ForgeBox for getting things like the bcrypt library, or getting the new version of Lucy to test, or to install CF Wheels or Framework One or ColdBox or Preside or whatever you're doing. Keep your stuff up to date. But I mean, all the tools from Peter are awesome. See it, like adding linting to your development process will improve it. CF format's amazing for that too. DocBox improves your documentation. They're all great tools. I mean, so definitely recommend all of them.
Well, now that everyone listening has installed all these tools, and now their code is fully linted, secure, and modernized, let's look at code reuse.
Yep. So this one's a good one. Surprisingly, though, what features do you use for code reuse? CF includes is actually lower than CFC. So more people use a CFC. So almost 30% of people use CFCs for code reuse than CF
I think
includes.
I'm just going to comment, I think those percentages may not be accurate, because we had 450 people who responded to the survey, give or take. I could look up the number exactly. And your percentage is, because this was a multiple choice question, your total number is bigger than the number of people who answered the survey. So I think 99% of people use CFCs.
Okay, out of the 400, you're right. Sorry, out of the total respondents, I should probably have a percentage for that. So let me do this one right here.
Let me get you or do you have the total respondents somewhere else?
I might have in one of the other questions.
I'm not sure when you grabbed it, but I can tell you what the current total number is, because it's on our results page.
I'll just say 400 for now, and then we'll do it.
Yeah, 400 is a good guess for when you got the data spreadsheet.
Yeah, so if we do D3. Whoops. Wrong one. So C3.
Because when you said only 30% of people use CFCs, an alarm bell went off. I know everyone uses CFCs.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't use them a lot, but they sure use them somewhat.
Yeah, let me start fresh here. So my Excel skills are getting messed up here.
Maybe just overwrite the total number with 400. That will get you, or whatever you want to do.
Okay, so this number.
There you go. 98%.
So 98% of people use it, but the surprising number is that only 72% of people use CF includes, which is
that can't be true, really.
That's what I mean. That's the weird part to me. I mean, people using CFCs, I get that, but CF includes, that's kind of crazy. And then of course you've got user-defined functions. So 65% of people use user-defined functions. That makes sense, although that's pretty close to the CFCs. See, custom tags, 50% of people using custom tags. That does surprise me, because as much as people seem to hate custom tags in ColdFusion, I would have thought that would have been a whole lot.
Why do they hate them? Well, they're kind of handy.
Yeah, I think they're great for UI related stuff, but there's a lot of people that give it a bad rap, but for wrapping tags and layouts and stuff, they have their place. And then modules and extensions, provided by their framework. So 40% of people do stuff with that, which is great. And then 1.5% of people say none. So that's kind of interesting.
Well, that's where the spaghetti comes from,
Well, I did meet a guy at one of the Adobe summits, the Adobe road shows. And he was talking, and he was like old school coder. I mean, but he's been coding as long as me. So, I mean, I guess I'm old school too, but he was like, he was talking about like, I never use this and I never use that. And I'm like, well, the 5 tag uses CFinclude, right? As well as CF output and then a loop and an if. But I was like, he's like, no, I don't even use CFinclude. I want my code to be a story. Like I want it to read like one whole big old story. I'm
like
like,
War and Peace by the sounds of it.
yeah. And I was like, that's interesting. But I'm like, I'm not sure how I could do stuff without at least the CFinclude. But you know, each their own. There's many ways to do it, you know, just because everyone else says it. But
if it works for him, good for him.
Yep. So it's kind of nice that we got a good mix there. But yeah, so the CFer.
But I would recommend people do something for code reuse, because copying and pasting code blocks around is a very bad idea for maintenance.
Yep. Well, they gotta, you know, there's the dry methodology, don't repeat yourself, versus the wet methodology where people say, you know, write everything twice is a bad thing. But sometimes they say writing everything twice is not a bad thing because you learn about the code and then don't do it again. And, you know, because there's also the sort of policy where, you know, avoid hasty abstractions. You don't abstract things away before you need to. But I think it's like the 1, 2, 3, you know, refactor, as a lot of people say. Like the third time you write it, you've figured out what you're trying to do with it, then you refactor it so you're not repeating. But there's a lot of great tools. And again, I love ForgeBox because most tools that need to be written have been written. There's a bunch on there. If you want to write an API wrapper around something, there's probably already one there. Like you can find it. So don't reinvent the wheel. But, you know, there's still opportunities for new stuff.
And if you're inventing a new wheel and it's something useful for other people, why not post it into ForgeBox so that other people can comment on it, improve it, and use it?
Yeah, I actually did like 4 videos this year on Charlie's online CF Beat-Up about code reuse and when should you roll your own versus, you know, reinvent the wheel, and, you know, how can you use a third-party library in ColdFusion and all those things. So I've just done a whole bunch on that because I think more people should be aware of when you should rewrite something, when you should reuse, because sometimes reusing somebody else's module is a bad idea, but you need to know the reasons and the sort of the things to just think about. And so I actually wrote, like I said, I did 3 or 4 presentations. I did a ForgeBox presentation on ForgeBoxification. So, you know, there's plenty of videos out there. If you go on YouTube and hit the Ortus channel, there's actually a channel about, I think it's Ortus in the Wild, where all of our other videos are. So check those out because reuse is very important. You know, I think that's what makes our language as good as it is.
Well, now we talked about reuse. I think we should talk about source control, because all this refactoring is a disaster zone if you're not doing source control. But fortunately, very few people don't do source control at this point.
Yeah, I mean, but then what is your definition of source control too? Because in this list here, we start with the big ones, right? So we got GitHub, 23%. And let's do the same thing we just did on the last one of percentages of things, because I think that's important as well. Because versus the percentage of actual responses, because some people use more than one, right? So let's do that.
They do.
So if we do that, so almost 7% of people, so 7% of people don't use anything, or they don't do it and they do something else, which is kind of weird. But anyway, so 7% of people don't actually use it at all, but some of them
wait a minute. I wouldn't call zipping up folders source control. It's kind of a backup strategy.
Yeah,
and copy directories from time to time is not, that again is a backup strategy. Glad you do it, but you know.
Yep, and that was my point, is that some of these you might think are source control, but no, they're not really. Source control gives you a lot more power and flexibility. There's a lot more inside of it. But like Beyond Compare is just comparing 2 sets of files. It's not source control. It's just seeing what's changed.
But we included that in the survey because people wrote it in a lot.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is,
that's their version of, you know, controlling their code. But it's not quite the same as when you say GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, Subversion, Tortoise SVN.
Yes.
So those ones there. So probably 6 of the top, you know, so many. And to be honest though, like if you add that up, so the 3, 4, 10, 16. So we're basically, you know, we're probably about 70%, 80% are using a good form of source control. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And then some of these other ones, like you said, they're more backups. You know, Mercurial's down here too, so we could add that. But
that's real. Azure DevOps, that's real. But Google Drive, no.
Yeah, I mean, it has versions, but it's not the same as source control. But yeah,
No.
but like they're copying directories from time to time or adding .bak, bak.bak after a file name is not the same. But
No.
it's good to see that the trend is
So
going the right way.
anyone who isn't doing any source control or backup, definitely do something. And here are a lot of options listed. But really, you want to use a real source control. And the number 1 and 2 here are both Git based, GitHub and Bitbucket.
Even
and number
GitLab
3 too, GitLab.
Yeah.
So use a Git based. The most programmers use a Git based one because it's better for distributed team development and has better merge features than Subversion or some of these other custom things.
Yeah, and it's good. This is one I'd like to sort of see if we group the Git versus backup strategy trends over time. I'd like to see, because I think this number used to be way lower before.
It did,
I think
yeah.
over the years, more people are using source control, and it's great to see. So,
well, there was a CFer who will remain nameless because A, I can't remember his name, and B, he's a bit of a curmudgeon. But he wrote a blog article about this about 10 years ago saying, why are all these people not using source control, from the survey? And he was, although he expressed it in a bit of a mean way, he was right,
Oh, yeah. I mean, trust me, I know. And I've still had to deal with previous customers that won't commit their code. So if I go work on their stuff, I have to basically do a git commit of whatever they've done since I last touched it, so then I can continue my work.
Well, to be fair, it is, when people get started, it is a little confusing, and it's a command line interface unless you have one of those Tortoise or other GUI things.
Yeah,
and the whole strategy is a bit confusing. Like, when should you branch? When shouldn't you?
But I mean,
it's not confusing once you've done it for a few days, but I'm just telling you my experience of having customers who've never done it before, and we help them to understand what to do, and they're confused.
Yeah, I mean, worst case though is like if you have Source Tree, which is free and you can use it to GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you just like, okay, I'm releasing some code to production today, commit everything you've done to your source control, and then push it. And then worst case, you've at least got a history that you had something, you changed it or you deleted it. It's better than a backup strategy. And that's at least something. And so that's not very confusing. There's
and
no
the reason
branching,
it's better than the backup strategy is it's more consistent. Yeah. More likely to have major changes. Secondly, you can see the differences, right? You can see these lines were changed by this person on this date, and they were part of this bug fix. And then also, if you've got multiple developers working on the project, someone can be fixing one bug or adding one set of features. Someone else is doing totally separate things, and then you can merge them together once they're both tested. So you can't do that by copying things around.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, worst case, if you just commit all your code, it doesn't have all those things you just mentioned, which are great, but at least you have something, and it's not hard. When you start doing the branching the right way and organizing, it does get a little more confusing, but there's great sessions out there that people have done that have been recorded, and there's great little tools and everything. So I mean, it's definitely a plus. And if you go work in any other language, if you don't have it, they're gonna wonder why, and they're probably not going to hire you if you don't even know what one is or how to use it. So it's a good tool that everybody should learn. I mean, they teach it in high school now for coders, so. And
a lot of IDEs have, add-ons, extensions. Let's go to the IDE section, see what the most popular IDE is. Drum roll, please. Oh my goodness, it's like the biggest by a factor of 3, I think. What's the answer? What's the top one for those listening at home?
VS Code. No surprise. VS Code. And this one will be I'd love to see this over time as well, because for the longest time, Sublime and Notepad++, and even CF Builder used to be really popular, but over time you've seen them slip. And so like CF Builder now it's down to what, 5th on our list, and this was before the new VS Code.
Now Adobe, exactly. You say it, Gavin.
Yeah, I was saying the new VS Code extension from Adobe for the CF Builder is out. So now everyone who uses the
is
new
it
version
actually
of CF
out
Builder,
or is it still in beta? Because
I think it's out. It was beta before. Well, it's at least in public beta. I think it's out now. So a lot of people are using it. There's been a few issues that some people have had, but other people are loving it and they've had no issues at all. So I'm not sure.
And just to be clear that's not just an IDE, it's like a debugger and a performance monitor tie-in and all kinds of features they have. I wrote a long article on all the features they have in there. It's like it's far more than an editor.
Yep, and the Adobe Developer Week, they actually had a session on it, and CF Summit coming up, they're going to show some more. And so if you guys are interested in the VS Code extension for ColdFusion Builder, definitely check out those resources and try it out. I mean, you can always plug it in and give it a whirl. And there's a lot of tie-ins to, like you say, their debugging, their performance monitor, their security analysis tool. A lot of those things are tied in, and as long as you have the a licensed version on your machine, you can do like everything the old CF Builder could do, and even without that, you still have a lot of power and flexibility there.
But it looks like 3/4 of people or more, maybe 80%, are using VS Code.
Well,
and it's free. It's from Microsoft, which some people might say, well, I'm allergic to Microsoft, but there is an open source version of it out there that removes the Microsoft telemetry.
So based on that 400 numbers, almost 80% of people use VS Code.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, Sublime and Notepad++ are paid, as are a few other of these editors I see
Sublime,
listed
there has a free version that just nags you all the time. Yeah, it just nags and nags and nags, but you can get away with using it for free. But IntelliJ is a paid one too. But CF Builder, they had a free version. Basically, you have to pay for some of the fancy tools, and CF Eclipse was the old plugin version.
But the new CF Builder extension for VS Code, that's paid, isn't it? I thought.
Well, I think if you install it for a lot of the features to work, you need to have a licensed server on your machine. But remember, in development, you get the development license for free, so you can run a development server. So there's some leeway there with that. But I mean, I think it's worth trying out. But it's interesting that some of the old ones like CF Studio and Homesite still have a 1.5%, 2.5%. And IntelliJ WebStorm is way down there at 1.25, but IntelliJ IDE, the IDEA, is at 9%. But Dreamweaver, I thought that would be higher. I really did think.
No, they've kind of abandoned that. You can still get ColdFusion tag support for it.
I think that's a typo on my side, because I think I remember looking at it and going, "Wow, that's got a lot of people still." So I wonder. I'm going to have to look it up. I think there's 40. So I might have messed that one up.
Really? Oh,
yeah. I'll have to.
I'm shocked.
I maybe fat fingered it or something, because I have a feeling it was actually 40. I believe it was right after Notepad++, but I'll check it out in a different window here as we're chit chatting about it. So, but yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in there for sure, and it's good to see most of them. But still a lot of people using brackets and Atom, which are both dead now, pretty much. Notepad.
Yes, you were right. It was 40.
Okay, well, let's fix this.
Yeah, I went to the TerraTech site that has all the dynamic graphs on.
Yeah, my bad. I fat fingered that one. So
no worries. So Dreamweaver's a bit more popular, and Dreamweaver's nice because it's WYSIWYG, and a lot of people who came from HTML, grew up on that. So
yeah, I did for the longest time, but they didn't have any updated extensions.
No,
a lot of the scripts weren't supported, but that's still 10% of people use Dreamweaver.
But I think VS Code is really worth trying out. I know people think IDEs are a religion and they don't want to change because like they're used to the keystrokes or whatever, but or the UI. But
there's no excuse for the keystrokes. Because you can import the mappers. So if you use Sublime, you can import the Sublime key map, and then VS Code's key map is Sublime's. And I think there's one for
just to go into dangerous territory. This is almost like saying you could change from being, Methodist to Catholic by changing the keystrokes on the Bible or something, and then you'd have it all covered because there's a
but see, a lot of people.
I better stop that before it gets out of control.
But some people just, some people like the tool and the way it works.
Yeah.
Some people just like the shortcuts. They're used to the shortcuts.
Right.
And so if it's just the shortcuts you're used to, you can include the mapper in VS Code, and then all the shortcuts basically match what you're used to.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the real reason VS Code's good is because it's fast, it's reliable, it has a zillion extensions for every language under the sun, including multiple extensions for ColdFusion.
Yep.
And it just, it works really good. And I don't know how many millions of dollars Microsoft pours into it. I mean, it's open source, but they obviously have a whole engineering team beavering away on it.
Yep.
So
and they have a bunch of videos up on MS Build. They have release parties every month for the new releases. And every week on our CFML News podcast, we give you a new VS Code hint, tip, and trick of the week, where we go into some of the extensions that are either just cool for developers in general or ColdFusion related stuff. But a lot of times
I smell a future book where you collect all those tips together into one big article.
Well, we actually have every year we do like a review. So every year we have about 50 tips, tricks from VS Code. We have the same for ForgeBox. And so the last few years since we built the podcast, we have these big ones at Christmas time where you get all the last year's worth of
all
stuff.
The tips.
Yep, all the tips. So you can get
good.
just
now
ForgeBox
I will say that there is some telemetry that Microsoft sends back to their home ship, so to speak. They say that it's just like on the performance of the problem thing. I'm not sure they're not like copying everyone's source code behind the scenes. I've never totally trusted Microsoft myself, but maybe they don't do that. But if you believe that, there's an open source version that removes that code from it. So
yep. And the cool thing is you can even run VS Code in your browser. So you can go to a browser version of the site, plug in your email address, and it will synchronize and install all your modules you have loaded locally. And so a lot of repos on GitHub, if you go to div.github.com/the repo, it'll actually open that repo in like a VS Code version. You sign in with the GitHub account, which matches your VS Code one, and now all your extensions are installed, and you can edit it in there for like a pull request and stuff. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, they're definitely mixing it up. The fact that Microsoft owns VS Code and GitHub, there's some cool stuff.
Microsoft owns GitHub?
Yeah.
I must have missed that. Was that
3 or
on
4
CNN?
years ago? Well, 3 or 4 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Okay.
They took over GitHub. So,
but they don't own GitLab or Bitbucket, right?
No, so they don't own the Git structure and the formatting and whatever. But GitLab, that's why for the longest time GitHub was free for public stuff, but private stuff you had to pay for. And then they took over and said, no, we'll give everybody free. But of course, there's probably some some metrics.
I think they are analyzing the code to improve their, let's just hope it's just to make better tools in the future so they can see what kind of code people write. But
yeah,
I mean, it's the same thing Google gets up to. They give you Google Docs for free, but you can guarantee they're just analyzing how every keystroke you make, supposedly to improve the product, right? And I'm sure they do improve the product, but I'm a bit whatever. Paranoid is maybe the word.
Yeah,
with good reason, because Google has been proven to do some pretty evil things.
Yeah,
but we won't go off on that tangent.
Exactly. I mean, they always say there's always a price to everything. If it's free, you're paying with your data. So
exactly. Let us proceed on to browser dev tools.
Yeah, and so this one again, I'm going to copy my little code here for this because, again, the percentage that I calculated was based on the number of respondents, the number of responses, not the respondents. So 92.25% of people use Chrome. So that's probably pretty
dev
expected.
Tools, just to be clear, this is
Chrome dev tools.
Not do you use the browser, it's what dev tools do you use to debug your JavaScript.
Yeah, stuff. Not even JavaScript, HTML, CSS, everything. But everything, so Chrome dev tools 92.25%, Firefox dev tools are at 52%. And then I was surprised that Edge is up to 24% now. I know Edge's tools are pretty good, actually, surprisingly.
Okay.
I mean,
so even if you don't
Chromium
use the browser
for
your own personal browsing, you might use the dev tools in Edge because they're better.
Well, some people like yourself may not like the fact that Google's watching, so they don't like Chrome.
So I'd rather have Microsoft watch instead.
Yeah, and now that IE dev tools is really low at 6.5, but that's to be expected because of the old IE version.
Yes.
But the new version of Edge, built on top of the whole Chromium family, WebKit, and all that, it's it's pretty good, and the web tools are pretty good too. So a lot of people are trying that because. I mean, I used to love Firefox, but I had so many issues. So I went to Chrome and I love Chrome. But when Chrome's not working, I've used Edge and it's not terrible, surprisingly.
Yes.
And that's what the funny thing is. People are like,
it's better.
It's not terrible. So
yes, it's actually improved. And IE is now totally end of life. Microsoft said we're not going to issue security stuff and what have you. So why anyone is still using that? It's a bit of a mystery. I know why they're using it. It's an internal app that they force their users to use IE is the answer. But to me, that's a little ridiculous.
Well, the funny thing is that Firebug was the tool that everybody used before Firefox and Chrome and everybody built their div tools. Firebug inspired Firefox to build div tools, and I thought Firebug has been dead for a while, but maybe you just didn't need to install it anymore because Firefox had its own built in, and so people just they didn't use it as much. But for a long time, Firebug, I thought, was like a dead tool. Basically, it sort of died, but I guess you can still use it in other stuff. But anyways,
let us move on to some programming goodness with REST APIs.
Yeah. So what do you use to build your REST API? So we have a decent number of people, and again, I'm going to copy in my little stuff here for overall respondents. So 22% of people don't use REST at all. 5.5% of people don't use ColdFusion for their REST, and 2.5% don't use they use other tools. But the ones that are using it, 23.7%.
Maybe we should tell people what REST is, because those people who don't use it maybe have no idea why they should use it or what it even is.
Yeah. So I mean, REST APIs is a pretty popular base type of APIs. It's the one that most people refer to when they say APIs these days. And so it's really focused around resources. And so there's the definition of REST and what people actually use REST for is kind of out of date. And I mean, do you know about the whole REST, not REST, the whole state stuff?
No.
Have you heard that?
Oh, it's supposed to be stateless?
Yeah, like the whole stateless, but a lot of people don't actually do that.
No.
So I mean, it's a
API. Protocol. It's a protocol for writing APIs so other people can consume them.
Yep, exactly. And so it's meant to be, where you use a GET request to get a record, you use a post to create one, you use a put to update it, use a delete to delete one, and everything's based around resources. So if you want to get a person, you'd hit / API / v1 if you're versioning it / person, and then give the ID to get that person. Or if you just want to get a list of people, you just say get API v1 persons.
But before people listening panic and think they have to learn yet another whole programming technical thing, the whole point of this set of tools is it does it for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these tools definitely help with that. So they give you the things to make it easier. So the routes, because a lot of times those pretty URLs that the REST APIs use, you'd have to translate that into your ColdFusion app. And so all these nice tools that they're using here, they do that for you. There's a router, you can configure it. So the /
it also
and stuff. And
my understanding of REST, isn't there HTML and XML involved?
Doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be. Okay.
Yeah, XML can the API could be XML or JSON or whatever format you want. But the rest is sort of the style of it.
The point is, if you use the ColdBox REST tool, or you use the built into ColdFusion, I mean, when you write a CFC, doesn't it? You can, like, with one change to the code, it can be a REST API. No.
Yeah, I mean, you have to sort of do things a little differently depending on the framework. So like Taffy.io is another one that's on the list. And, basically in your handler, in your function, you have some metadata about it, and it tells the framework what route it should be on, how to get to it, and, which methods can run it. But things like ColdFusion's built-in REST, you have to go into the admin and sort of create the endpoints that way and point it at your CFCs. You can return JSON from a CFC. You can do a remote JSON. Basically, and that is, you're returning a JSON data, but it's not a REST API. Your CFC is basically, you're hitting that directly, and it's giving you a response that an API can consume, but it's not REST API in the traditional sense per se. So these tools give you the things like the routing, it gives you the structure, it gives you the ability to return different formats, and it makes it easy to do that, like you said. But yeah, a lot of people can do it in ColdFusion without it, and that's why some people say that they basically just do their own. Other is probably a lot of that, or they have a homegrown. Like 21% of people use their homegrown API REST, and so that's their own version of it. And it's one of those things. And then obviously the tools, ColdBox REST, or the CF built-in REST, or Taffy, or Framework One REST, CF Wheels REST, Preside REST, all of those tools give you a framework around it. So they give you some extra benefits and, additions to make it even easier to implement stuff like security and the routing and those other things. And so that's what makes those really possible. So it's kind of a cool thing, and it's nice for us from Audis, obviously, that ColdBox REST is the #1 way to build REST APIs in ColdFusion. Even more people use ColdBox REST than they don't use REST at all. So that's kind of a plus for us. But CF built-in REST is still at 23.5%. That's a lot of people. And I find that surprising because of the licensing. In standard, you're restricted a little bit in the way you use REST. When you go to enterprise, you have more flexibility. But that's one of the things where the built-in REST that it gives you the endpoints, you can't have too many apps running on the same server with the same endpoint in standard. They all have to be this certain format and structure. And so but yeah, 23.5% of people are using the CF REST.
Where does the API manager fit in? Is that now given away with Adobe ColdFusion Standard, or?
I think that's something they just changed recently. Previously, it wasn't enterprise only. I think,
right.
Don't quote me on this, but I think the API manager, they did make it available for standard maybe, but that's basically a tool that you put in between the user. It's actually not written in ColdFusion. It's like a Java thing. And so you basically plug that in between your users and your ColdFusion system, and you can do extra things like add additional caching, do some routing, do more security. So it's basically like a man in the middle helping you manage that. That's why it's the API manager. So it helps you with a lot of different things, and it's pretty neat actually. And again, you can use that in front of your ColdFusion API, but some people are actually using it in front of other APIs they're writing just because they have it, because it's a good tool, whether you're using ColdFusion or not. So
I'd say it's the best API tool out there, and it costs a lot less than the next, paid version tool out there that I can't think. I want tens of thousands or $100,000 for some of those API.
Yeah, those API management tools that give all of that as like a front facing piece. Yeah, it can be very expensive, and that's why that was a big plus for them. And so the cool thing is with that, you could still use Taffy or Framework One or ColdBox behind it. You don't have to use Adobe's ColdFusion REST endpoints. The API manager can point at whatever you're using for your APIs. And so it's kind of a freestanding item that you can use how you want to. So I really think it is a pretty cool tool. And again, watch some Adobe Developer Week videos on the API manager. It's pretty neat. And again, if you have the license, I believe now with standard, but definitely with enterprise, you get access to all that awesomeness.
So I think I should let people know that we're more than halfway through here. We're on question 20, and we're going to go to question 27 is our plan. So keep going. I know this is heavy technical info, so there's a lot of gems in here that you're sharing, Gavin. So the next thing up is caching.
So caching, obviously very important. We got some interesting numbers here. I'm going to copy in my little thing if it lets me. That way we can see overall. So 20% of people are using Cachebox, 19.25% are using Relo and Lucy Cache, 18% are using Redis Cache. A lot of people using CDNs. So CDNs like Cloudflare, other CDNs, 16.5%. And then EHCache 16%, Memcache 6.5%, Elasticache 5%, Couchbase 2%, and then 40% of people are not using any caching. So that's a little surprising. But some of these other ones here, the numbers are a little higher because Adobe
just to be fair, Adobe, ColdFusion has some caching built in, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm surprised because Adobe actually builds in like EHCache, I believe, and you can do Redis now as well. And so Adobe, you basically have a couple options. You use their caching, or you can build in, you can add an extension, or not an extension, but basically map in another type of provider, and you can make that work. Lucy allows you to basically add your own Lucy extension to the engine. So once you've installed the Couchbase or Redis extension, then Lucy can actually use that to do the caching. And so inside ColdFusion, if ColdFusion is caching, it has to use its options. You and your code can use whatever you have available or ColdFusion stuff. Lucy gives you the ability to use their options as well as whatever you install or any other module you manually put in your code too. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility for the engine itself to cache using a cache that you want that doesn't come out of the box. So that's one of the benefits for the Lucy stuff, but that's probably why a lot of people use, EHCache and Memcache and Redis. They're the more popular ones, but also with Adobe.
Some of these are single server solutions, right? And some are like a clustered server solution, so the cache data is shared between all the servers.
Yeah, and most of them have the option, I think, of having one or more. Like Redis, you can run separately or in a cluster. Couchbase is always in a cluster. I think EHCache and Memcache, I don't know as much about their structure setup. Maybe you do, but it's definitely Redis is the one that most people work towards these days. And so Cachebox, just like Logbox, is a way to basically abstract away the way you're doing your caching. So if you want to cache to Redis, or you want to cache to Couchbase, or if you want to cache to just the server, you can tell your code, hey, put this in the cache, and then Cachebox says, which cache are we using today? And it'll put it where you want it to go. So it abstracts it away for you. And Lucy does the same thing with its caching, like it stores it in whatever caching system you have set up. So you can tell it, I want to cache this in my RAM because I'm in local development, but when I'm on production, I want to put it in my Redis, or I want to put it in Memcache. So it's kind of cool. You have the option when you deploy the server to change those settings. And so those two are kind of more a provider of caching. And then looks like Redis is the ones that people are actually using to store it the most. But CDN, that's sort of different because it's, you're caching your files, your JavaScript or, images on the CDN. But obviously you can cache all sorts of stuff there. But
you can, and it sticks it in a local, whatever they call it, data center, or I don't know what Cloudflare or those other CDNs call them, but
the regions, they call them
regions.
Okay. Yeah.
But the point is, it's really near to the user, so and once it's got there, if you're on a paid plan, they don't have to re-download it from your server, so it's less load on the server, faster performance for your users, particularly on mobile. So it's worth having that on top of whatever caching you're doing to cache the queries or to cache the HTML or that you're generating in the app or whatever you're using the caching for.
Yep, and most people use it just for database caching. But yeah.
But isn't that sort of built? That's also, you've got the ColdFusion layer where you cache the queries, but also in SQL Server, doesn't it cache queries too?
It caches the query plan. Usually the queries themselves aren't cached, from my understanding, but if you've run a query plan recently, a lot of the work that the query does is, figuring out how to query it, and then it'll actually query it. But
that's maybe what I was thinking of.
Yeah. Sometimes you will, there's probably some setups in there you can do, but usually it's the query plan that gets cached if you're given it the right information to make a query plan. But usually ColdFusion or Lucy, you can say, hey, cache my query for so long, and that's usually the best win, and that's usually what most people use for querying. And that's why I'm like 40% aren't using any caching is kind of strange, because you'd think at least in production you might have some queries cached, but maybe they just don't realize what it's doing, so that's fine too.
Let us move on to a mysterious new topic that many developers aren't even using, which is message queues. What is a message queue and why should you be using it? Because clearly most people don't get it.
Yeah. So message queues is basically a way for you to put things that your app is working on into a queue to process later. Because some things take longer than we want to do. When we're running a process, ColdFusion starts it, it does all the work, and then when it's done, it returns it back to the user. Sometimes you want it to do work that you don't want to wait around for. And so waiting around and making a user wait around is just not efficient. So a lot of times when you're sending emails, if you want to send 5,000 emails because you got a big marketing mail list, you want to basically, say, hey, you want to send these emails, cool, let me put those 5,000 email addresses in the queue and I'll get around to sending it in the next hour. But thanks for your request. We got it. We're working on it. Or the same thing too, if you're going to generate a 5,000 page PDF, because you want to print this big old book. You don't want to wait around for that to happen before you give an answer back to the person. So you'll stick that in the queue, say, hey, these are the criteria. This is the search they had. They want to print this. You put in the queue, and when it's done, the queue processor will have a list, and then you got these little people that work on it. And so when it's done, it puts the PDF on S3 or something, and then emails the person, says, hey, this is ready for you now, come download it. And you've seen that with Google Drive. If you download a whole folder, it'll basically process in the background, and eventually it'll send you the file to download. So a queue is just a way to, basically make some tasks asynchronous. And the cool thing is your web server doesn't need to be very big and strong if all the big tasks get handed off. So if you're doing like photo processing, someone uploads the photo, you're like, got it, I'll resize it into the 15 versions we want for your photo site, but I'll do that later, or if you want to put something out S3, and S3 is going to do some transcription of a video, all these big long tasks that aren't really ColdFusion's job, you can put in a queue, and then other languages can read it. And that's why Brian Classes talks, when he talks about AWS, and all his workflows are great, because ColdFusion is not efficient at reading video and transcribing data and then creating words from those texts to read. Like, he does all sorts of crazy workflows for the Johns Hopkins University, and that's not ColdFusion's specialty. ColdFusion being the glue is perfect. It can basically interface between all these, shove things in the queue. The queue can be worked on by the right tool for the right job, and then ColdFusion gets the job done and sends you the notifications or updates the UI based on that. So that's a long version of it. Did I miss anything?
I think what I'd add in, many people have programmed queues themselves. What's great about these third-party queue softwares is they're 100% reliable. So you stick something in the queue, if the process fails, it's going to re-kick it off, and or you'll get an error message back if it's impossible. So
yep. And then there's a lot of different queue systems out there, and some are what they call I've forgotten the name for it now, but it's basically some queues that are sort of in memory, and so if something happens, you lose all that. And some of them are persistent queues, so it might live in the database, so it'll live longer. And like there's a lot of different tools out there, but RabbitMQ is top of the list, which is no surprise. It's probably the most popular one. I've seen lots of presentations at CF Summit, CF Objective. Brad is actually doing one at CF Summit coming up this week about RabbitMQ. But Amazon SQS service is another great one, and that's probably why it's second in there at 6.25%. Redis has queues now as well, so 4.25% of people using Redis. And then there's Kafka and Azure Service Bus and ActiveMQ, and even SQL Server has a service broker now. So there's kind of a few other ones there, but I think it's one of those things that everybody wants to use, but they're kind of complicated and hard to set up and a little bit more work. And so we're not using as much of them as we probably should be. But it's one of those things. If your app is doing some bigger pieces of work, a queue is great for that. And a lot of that's for like sending messages off to chat box or whatever, or emails, or following up with things. You can do all sorts of great things with queues.
Excellent. Well, let's get more personal and look at how many years people have been using ColdFusion.
Yeah. So out of this list here, we have 412. So that's what those numbers should have been. So 412.
Well, this was a pick one question. So
yep, exactly. So in this one here, we have only 2 developers that filled out the survey have been doing ColdFusion for less than a year. But it's kind of interesting. Between 1 and 2, we had 2%, and then 3 to 5, we have 3%. So basically, if you add up the numbers, we're basically 5% of ColdFusion developers have started within the last 5 years. But
what's the lifetime expectation of a ColdFusion developer? I mean, if they start at age 20 and go to age 60 or thereabouts, that's 40 years, right?
Yeah.
So 5 years should be an eighth of the numbers, but you're saying it's 5%, not an eighth. An eighth would be I can't do the math quite right, but there you go.
Yeah.
So it's a little below where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with 20 plus years being 53%, most people that are still doing ColdFusion have been doing it for most of their life. So if you look at 16 to 20 years and the 20 plus years, you're basically at 70% of people have been doing it for more than 15 years. So 16 years or more, 70% of people.
Well, just to be fair, the max possible number of years you could be doing ColdFusion is 25 or 26, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it should be 27 now because came out in 95. So, yep.
Okay. So it could be 27, but I think that the overall point here is we need more young blood to come in to ColdFusion. And anyone listening has suggestions on how we can achieve that. I don't know if you have any suggestions you want to share, Gavin, maybe from the Into the Box conference. I think there might have been some ideas that came out of that.
I know that we're obviously trying to reach more people in ways we can. Audis tries to present itself at other conferences. So we've been at, that conference this year. We've been at DevNexus. We try to go to other conferences and speak. Usually we're talking to their crowd about things that are relative to them, but a lot of times we'll show off tools like Command Box or other things we're doing. But I mean, I think if people just said, hey, ColdFusion's the JavaScript for the server, we would be on fire, because really looking at Ruby, looking at PHP and Python, like if someone writes JavaScript, CFML is the best relative language on the server. So if you need to write JavaScript
doing better than writing Node.js, which is also JavaScript-esque, but a lot more complicated to do.
Well, I mean, it's JavaScript, but it's very immature. It doesn't have all the tools and the technology and the frameworks and the history. Like they're still cowboy coding. So like this stuff out there's a lot of great libraries, but it just doesn't seem to have the framework. It doesn't have the organization. Some of the best practices are still new. And so in that respect, I think ColdFusion is really good. But obviously I like it. I use it a lot. But I mean, I look at Laravel and stuff, and they've got great tools. They got a great, number of people and all these things. But when I look at the code, I'm like, why doesn't it just read like JavaScript? Because JavaScript syntax is it makes sense to me. So for me on the ColdFusion side, it's like, yeah. So I mean, I could go write some Java, but it's verbose, But it's one of those things. Looking at languages, it's like, well, they have their pros and cons, but for new people coming in, if they're learning JavaScript, because most people are learning JavaScript these days. If you want a powerful, heavy-hitting server-side language that isn't Node, that looks like JavaScript, that's ColdFusion. And so I think we could get more people's attention with that. But again,
I would agree. Maybe we need to talk to the Lucy and Adobe marketing teams and see if they can rebrand it that way.
Yeah, because I mean, I use Quasar and Vue.js stuff, and a lot of them are trying to, build up all these sites and trying to train people how to use it. And they always deal with a server-side language, and they use Laravel because it has a lot of great libraries and tools and everything else. But I'm actually thinking about going to them and saying, hey, if you guys are writing JavaScript, why don't we show them a backend that looks like JavaScript? And it has most of the same tools that Laravel has, and it has most of the same things, and there's a free open source version, So I'm thinking about trying to push that way, because
that's a great idea.
Because I mean, looking at Laravel, I mean, I understand PHP. I've written PHP, but I don't like it. So if I can do all the same things in ColdFusion for them, then maybe that's a good way to do it.
I'd say PHP is a bit picky,
Yeah,
and verbose.
It can be. It's just, I don't know. It's just like to call a method or something. It just looks weird to me. It looks wrong. But that's because I've done ColdFusion for so long and JavaScript for just as long. So, but I mean, we need to get out.
I'd add in two other reasons for young folks to pick up ColdFusion. One is it was like one of the fastest languages. Brad ran this speed test, real world speed test, not a faked out one. And I think ColdFusion was number 2, way faster than PHP and Laravel. Or this was ColdFusion with ColdBox, so a real framework that does a lot of work for you. And it was really fast. So
yep, they ran a Lucy version, an Adobe version, and they ran Lucy with ColdBox and Adobe with ColdBox.
Yeah,
and they were all up there. And and it depends on the type of thing. And like the one I think they were reading so many records or writing so many records to the database. So the task that Brad had in it was a specific task. And some languages really excel at certain things and not at others. But it shows that we're competitive. And if we're just as competitive, then why not? So I think if we can, just keep pushing. And
I would say ColdFusion's more than competitive. It was faster than, 2 or 3 times faster than other languages. It's, a 20% of the code to write compared to PHP to do the same things. And on the security, I wrote an article on this based on some security data. There's a lot less hacks done against ColdFusion, zero-day stuff.
I mean, to be honest, I think the biggest thing that has held ColdFusion back for the longest time is hosting. I really think because with PHP, you can go get a PHP site on GoDaddy for $2 a month or whatever. There's a bunch of PHP sites everywhere that can give you hosting for dirt cheap. And for someone starting out, it's way easier. I mean, there are Lucy hosting options out there, but there aren't very many. They're hard to find. They're not mainstream. And so if you do know it, you've got to basically set up your own server or use one of the shared hosting providers, but they're not cheap. Their prices are going up. There's not a much about
But
it.
I have
it's really
I have the
hard.
silver bullet answer to that, Gavin.
Docker.
And then you
Yep.
can put it anywhere. You can put it on DigitalOcean. It's only $5 to $10 a month, depending on how much resources you need.
Yeah, because DigitalOcean has the app platform now, so you can put it up there without even having a server.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are options for it, but I think that's been the biggest setback. And a Docker container costs more than a WordPress host.
But let's face it, how many enterprises need to spin up an app in WordPress? They may have a site in WordPress for their marketing department, but if you're doing real world work, I know people who do stuff in WordPress, and it's quite a headache using all those plugins and, custom PHP code. It's not, it's not a walk in the park.
But languages gain popularity because the developers use it. And so if we don't have new developers using it, then we won't get them to push it. If you can't play with it by yourself at home and then push up your own little hobby sites as a developer who's playing, we're not going to get them using it. We're not going to get them,
maybe we need
Microsoft
to buy ColdFusion and then they'll make it free.
Maybe, but yeah.
That was a joke, guys.
Hey, they're buying everything else, but yeah.
They've bought everything else.
But it's tough. I mean, then again, like people are struggling to get people to go to Ruby. Ruby has been fighting the Ruby's dead thing, just like ColdFusion has for years. I'm like, finally, somebody else is, feeling our pain. But
I think every language that's more than 5 years old has that. I've seen PHP is dead, Perl is dead, Ruby is dead. I don't know. Name any language you can Google and find that it's dead. All the languages have died. They're all now zombies and will come back as reincarnations.
Well, on a couple of questions, we'll get to that. But let's just talk about OO real quick.
Yes.
So years using OO.
Only 4 more questions to cover today. So hang in there, guys.
So OO is object-oriented programming. So it's since we had CFCs come out, we could actually do some object-oriented things. And the big thing with OO is encapsulating your data with your methods and polymorphism, inheritance. Those are sort of the things that people talk about when they're talking about object-oriented programming. And CFCs have given us a great way to do that. And having a dynamic language like we have gives us a lot of options with OO that even Java can't do some stuff. So it's interesting. It was pretty scary for a lot of people to sort of get used to it. But I know Matt Gifford wrote that book about object-oriented programming in ColdFusion probably like 15 years ago. And that's probably the best book still to read. But we did a ColdBox series, ColdFusion series on object orientation on CFcast. Nolan Irk helped us produce that, and like that really, I think, fills the gaps for a lot of people. But I think people using basic OO with CFCs, and they just haven't got the full capacity, and a lot of people don't need it because they don't know what they're missing. So I think reading some books like Clean Code and Clean Architecture and, the Design Patterns book by Headfirst, all those great books and talking about design patterns and the problems they solve and, how to use OO to reduce code reuse and stuff. We'll get more people using it. But, it seems like a lot more people
just looking at just
longer.
adding up those bottom 4 things. People have used OO for more than 5 years. It's about 86% if you add the bottom 4 ones up. So, because these are mutually exclusive. So, seems like most people who took the survey, and just a disclaimer: not all ColdFusion developers take the survey. We wish they would, but it's the people who are more active in the groups and listen to podcasts and what have you tend to fill out surveys. So, there's a whole dark matter section of ColdFusion developers that we haven't quite figured out how to reach.
And if you look at this over time too, this has gone up a lot because before there were a lot of people that did not use OO, but I think more people are moving towards it, or, maybe it's getting more popular in other languages where we're seeing the translation. So,
Well, and it's also unclear, like you said earlier, what level of OO are they doing? Are they just writing some CFCs and calling it OO, or are they doing some more heavy level stuff with objects? So,
Yep.
um,
So back to languages, because other languages we use are important. And
what's the top language that CF developers use, Gavin?
I think it might be JavaScript. So
I think
90% of people who filled out the survey said JavaScript. Which
I'm amazed that it's not 100%. How can you write web apps without any JavaScript?
But then again, they say, well, it's languages or environments, but Ajax is 37%, which is interesting because you'd think, is it an environment? But 33% are writing Node.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big number. And then Java is after that. So 30% of people writing ColdFusion who filled out the survey are also doing Java. And then we've got PHP at 27%. But then some of these other ones are kind of newer languages for the most part. Well, I guess not all of them, but Python. So we're at 21.5% of people writing Python, 19% .NET. And then we got some C# and some C++ at 14.25 and 7.25. Classic ASP. There's still 7% of people are writing classic ASP.
Wow.
And that came out right when PHP and ColdFusion did. And then they've obviously upgraded and they've got, .NET, everything. So, but then VB, I haven't heard of anyone writing VB in a while, and that's 7%.
Well, it's desktop, isn't it?
Yeah, but even that, I thought people were writing some, C# and F# and even .NET for desktop. But
well, you can get VB.NET, which is the same basic thing as C#, but with a different front language, right? I mean, it's the same framework underneath.
Yeah, I guess even in the ASP Classic, you could choose if you wanted to write it in VB or whatever the other option was back in the day. There was different options you could write your code in.
Now, two things are interesting to me. First of all, many ColdFusion developers are multilingual, and they use other languages, which is great because you learn things from doing other languages, and it widens your opportunities. The other thing I want to notice is a language there that's like gets a lot of social media exposure, which is Clotcha. There's a lot of jumping up and down about it, but it's actually not that popular.
Yeah.
So
because I think the main reason is because it's so different. It's a Lisp language, right? And so it's very functional. There's a way too many curly braces, and and it's immutable. It's very different. But
yes, there are things it's good for, but it is very hard to switch from one of these other languages to it. So
yeah, and so Golang is up there at 3.5%, Ruby at 3.25, Flex is still there at 3%.
Isn't Flex dead?
Yeah, but
I mean, officially it's end of life, right? I mean, is there an open source Flex? I'm not aware of.
I think they donated it to the Apache library, so there might be something, but
so it might still exist.
Yeah, but the Groovy's at 2%, and R, which is the research statistics library, 1.75. But then the interesting thing is Perl. 4% of people still got some Perl going on. I remember that was before ColdFusion for me. That was
it's like 30 years old, I want to say, or more. Perl.
Yeah. So
pretty
interesting.
But there's still people doing Perl because there's old sites that were written in it. So
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, sometimes you drop into Perl from the command line for different things, or you run some command line tools that
right. Yeah, it's a great scripting language too. So, one of the first scripting languages, I want to say. But of course, now with Command Box, you can write all your scripts in ColdFusion code. So,
yep, you sure can. Even Bash scripts, you run it from command line and it reads it and says, "Oh, you need Command Box for this," and there you go.
Wow. Let's wrap up with two questions about where people, where they're working, how big the organizations are, and how many ColdFusion developers there are at the organization.
Yep. So this one here, this is looking at the number of companies that either have one dev, between 2 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 to 20, 20 to 31, 20 to 30, or 31 plus. And so there's 100 or 25% of people, they're the only ColdFusion developer at their organization.
It's kind of sad.
It's pretty sad.
Or it's freedom. It's the other way to look at it.
Yeah, they could be working for themselves. So that's, and the next question talks about the number of employees at their companies, which will sort of tie into it. But 100 of them are the only ColdFusion dev. Now there's 40% of people have between 2 and 5 devs there, which sounds about right. Usually it's a small team, and most companies will have that. And then there's 14.3% have a team of between 6, or not a team, but number of developers at their organization. They could be spread, but 6 to 10 devs in their organization, and 10% of them have 11 to 20. So the interesting thing is about 10.5% have 20 or more. So that's not too bad. But obviously the size of companies, there are less ColdFusion developers. We don't have too many, 100 plus.
I guess if we were trying to
anymore.
understand this, we should correlate the data between how many devs are there and how big's the organization. Because, when you've got Boeing that uses ColdFusion, Boeing must have 100,000 employees, more. I don't know.
A lot.
And they have 200 or 300 ColdFusion developers, is my understanding. Last time I chatted with someone there.
Yep.
In fact, they had their own ColdFusion news group just for Boeing employees at one point. But so it's hard to tell with these numbers, do they have lots of ColdFusion developers because they're a big organization or a federal agency?
Yeah.
Or do they have a lot of developers because, it's really important to their company,
yep.
The apps they're doing, but they're a medium-sized company. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, maybe we should add one in future years about how many developers in your team or group or something, like how, because there might be, like you say, there might be 100 employees that do ColdFusion, but they work in their own little silo.
Sure, they're spread around.
Because if we look at the
and
number
ColdFusion's great for doing departmental apps, so that could be true,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a common use case. Someone snuck it in because they got past the IT department. We only do Java because they snuck it in to do a departmental app, and so.
Because when we look at this here, like surprisingly, there are a ton of companies. Like we have about 20% of companies have 1,000 employees or more.
Wow.
So that's a big number. So we've got
40%
of companies
just
are
to be
under
clear,
20.
I can't quite think what a Fortune 1000 company is in terms of size, but it's way more than 1,000 employees.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up.
But I think it's safe to say, and I think Adobe said this, like 70% of Fortune 100 companies use ColdFusion, and all government. I'm pretty sure all US government agencies use ColdFusion, or there's very few exceptions.
Yeah, but are they filling out the survey? We're not sure. But yeah, so I mean, for an example, like Home Depot has 500,000 employees, Accenture 500,000, the Postal Service has 560,000. So you probably have to go
down use
a long
ColdFusion.
way. Yep. So I mean, there's a lot of, but the Fortune 500s, they're all over 200,000, 300,000 employees.
Wow.
So, and that's in the Fortune 500, but
most in the survey, most were small businesses by looks of it. 1 to 20 employees.
1 to 20 employees, there's 40% of them using that. And so under 50 employees, we had 53%. So yeah, so more than half the people filling out the survey was a small business under 50 people. And if you go up even further, there's 60% of people are in companies with 100 people or less.
Wow.
So if you got 100 people or less and you look at the developers, if we have 80% of developers are in teams between 1 and 10, but we got 60% of the companies are under 100%. So it's not too bad. So it looks like there's some decent groups in there, so kind of interesting numbers. So there's quite a few companies that are small, but there's quite a few developers at these companies. So,
well, we've come to the end of this section. We're going to have a part 3 where we talk about the ColdFusion community, deployment options, and comments and wrap up feedback that we got on the survey that has some interesting info in there. And then also we're going to look at trends over time, either in that episode or in a future one. So anything else you want to share, Gavin?
No, I mean, I think this is great. I really enjoy going through it and discussing it. And I mean, I think if you guys think there's some questions that we should ask next year, let us know so Michaela can add them to the survey, because there's some information we're missing. And usually when people put the other and they list things in the other, if they're important enough, we'll mention them here. But usually we just use those to help decide what the next year's options will be, right? So you and Brad usually
every
do a lot
year
of work
we
on
analyze the write-in options and see if something's really popular and it needs to be added in. We also look, to be honest, where people didn't pick off an option very much. and we eliminate it from the options, because why clutter up the survey with things people don't do? So
yeah, like Mova got no votes for the programming language or tools.
Out,
and it
going by.
Yep. And
now the only
Pulsar
exception
and,
is if it's a bleeding edge thing, like those message queue things, we will leave those in because we think more people are going to adopt that over time. And that's generally been true on technologies. Like if we went back 10 years and said how many people use CodeBox, not that many people used it back then, even though it existed, right?
Yep. A lot less, that's for sure.
So, we do a combination of looking at the data and also like, what are the trends here?
For sure.
So, cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. If people want to find you online, Gavin, what are the best ways to do that?
G Pickin on Twitter, and then obviously if you go to the Auto Solutions, you'll see a bunch of blog posts or different meetups and everything. I do a lot of videos on cfcast.com, but Twitter's the best way. I'll mention when I'm doing the CFML News podcast, and I usually retweet a lot of things from other people too. So that's probably the best way. But I'm on CFML Slack, I'm on the Box Team Slack. Anywhere and everywhere ColdFusion developers are, I'll be there too. So
excellent. Well, thanks for coming on the CFer Live podcast today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot for having me, and we'll see you for part 3.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode in your free CFer Live Modern ColdFusion Guide at teratech.com. That is teratech.com. Viva la CFer Live Revolution!